And the fact that the statements that they are making is kind of like, oh, this is like an ethics commission thing. And how is it an ethics commission thing when you're allowed to tell people you can't talk about a senator or a congressperson? You know, look at Virginia. What a hot mess it is. We've got the governor, the lieutenant governor, now their attorney general, all blackface, all racist. We all know Virginia was always a racist state. Always. But see, nobody seems to remember history. Democrats are the racists. And so them purporting and saying that we're racist is just deflection. That's what corrupt people do. They deflect. They, make you think like the other side is the bad guy.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history.
And that's how they win, right? Remember that.
We're not going to make America great again. It was never that great.
So now they're going to say, because control of virus is racist, it risks black people from going to the polls, right? So even if they do simply, say, hey, you're wearing a mask, you should be fine. Apparently, black people are more prone. You know what makes me wonder? So we know that the elderly die really easy from anything, right? But what if the Democrats are actually killing black people to get numbers? Like, what if they're going after black Americans? I mean, do you doubt that?
Based on the pseudoscience of eugenics, more than 30 states passed laws allowing for the forced sterilization of so-called defectives.
Syrian birth and took my child, and when they did that, they sterilized me. What do you think I'm worth?
State officials declared Riddick feeble-minded and unfit to have children.
Is birth control of such vital importance internationally? Is it just to save women's suffering? Is that the only reason in your mind?
Well, not entirely. The population question is a great concern today, and the rate at which the births come in to we're saving them now. At one time, when children died, they didn't have the food.
Do you feel that birth control is essential to keep millions of people across the world from starving?
Well, I think the birth control, if you keep your population more or less static until you pick up your resources.
Main reason is because I was poor and I am black. I believe that with all of my heart.
The problem is that the population is growing the fastest where people are less able to deal with it. So it's in the very poorest places that you're going to have a tripling in population by 2050.
The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are 17 targets we must meet by 2030 to ensure decent lives for all on a healthy planet. Right now, it's expected we will fail. One reason for that is the growth in our global population. Everyone deserves a long, healthy life. But when governments are poor, health systems buckle under the pressure of growing populations. Meanwhile, women and children are dying because of barriers to family planning. There is enough of everything for everyone on our planet now, if the richest nations take less and share more.
And so their ability to feed, educate, provide jobs, stability, protect the environment in those locations mean they're faced with an almost impossible problem. Northern Nigeria, Yemen, Chad.
What is Agenda 2063?
Agenda 2063 is the master plan for transforming Africa into a global powerhouse of the future by the year 2063, and ensuring that Africa's development is driven by investments that are sustainable and benefits all people.
There has been a revolutionary change in demographic research, partly because in the middle of the last century, around 1945, very few countries had good population data.
Something like 70 years ago, population was considered one of the biggest issues.
Demographers were well aware that following World War II, there would be a sort of explosion in the growth of the world's population, in part because of, really driven by the knowledge that had been developed about control of disease. And keeping people alive and protecting them from premature death is, of course, one of the great accomplishments of the 20th century.
There have been huge changes, not only in population research, but in population dynamics. The world is so different from what it was just a few decades ago. It has been a demographic revolution.
There was a big event in 1974. It was a World Population Conference in Bucharest, and there was discussion about population policy versus development policy. And the slogan it was development is the best contraceptive.
And after long debates, it was agreed that population affects development, but also development affects population.
In an article published Tuesday in the journal Bioscience, the scientists wrote that planet Earth is, quote, facing a climate emergency. Quote, the world population must be stabilized and ideally gradually reduced.
Achieving a sustainable global population matters. If we do, we can all have the dignity, security, and well-being envisioned by the Sustainable Development Goals.
Fertility-causing tetanus vaccines reared their heads yet again, this time fronted by NASA presidential candidate Raila Odinga, who revisited a claim made by the Catholic Church in Kenya in 2014 and 2015 that the Ministry of Health had administered tetanus vaccines contaminated with the hormone during a countrywide anti-tetanus drive, the hormone allegedly leading to infertility among the women who had received the vaccine. Odinga offering as proof an alleged analysis of the samples, which he claimed had been obtained from the laboratories of 4 organizations: AgriQuest, Nairobi Hospital, the University of Nairobi, and Lancet Kenya. Documents availed by the National Super Alliance appearing to show varying amounts of the hormone in individuals that were tested.
Test results in our possession indicate that some of the women who got this vaccination have since sought further tests and obtained results indicating that they can never carry a pregnancy unless a process of reversing the effects is initiated.
In 2014 and 2015, as the government undertook a nationwide anti-tetanus drive targeting women aged between 15 and 49, Kenyan Catholic leaders questioned the need for the program, arguing that there was no tetanus crisis in the country.
These women have 2 things in common. They are HIV positive, and they say they were sterilized without their consent. This weekly therapy session helps them recover from the trauma. Rhoda Musau is 40, childless and infertile. Her first child died young, and her second was stillborn. She was still recovering when her husband told the doctor to sterilize her.
The doctor told me they were cleaning my stomach. I don't know what happened. I just don't know. I learned about what happened 6 months later.
A woman rights group has published a report based on interviews with more than 40 HIV-positive women in Nairobi and Western Kenya. The women accuse some doctors in government hospitals and others in hospitals run by aid agencies of performing unauthorized sterilizations. Teresia Njoki was a report lead researcher. She says that there was no consent, women were misinformed, or sterilization was set as a condition for receiving free or discounted antiretroviral drugs and milk formula. She also says the practice goes back 2 decades, so many more women could have been affected.
The issue of sterilization has brought double stigma for the women. Remember, we are living with HIV. Then the issue of not being able to give birth. And this is Africa, where a woman who is not able to give birth, and again you are HIV positive, then you are no longer a woman.
On June 27, 1973, a lawsuit was filed that brought national attention to the issue of racially targeted sterilization abuse. In the late 1960s and into the 70s, civil rights activists noticed a widespread trend among women of color. It was sterilization. In June of '73, the Ralph sisters, 14-year-old Minnie Lee and 12-year-old Mary Alice, who was mentally disabled, were sterilized without their knowledge or consent. These African-American girls had the procedure done at a Montgomery, Alabama family planning clinic that received federal funds. Clinic workers deceived the girl's illiterate mother into believing that she was consenting to the girls getting birth control shots. 2 years earlier, the Ralph sisters had been given birth control injections as part of an experimental trial, again, without their consent. After the federal government ended that trial, the clinic nurses decided that the girls should be sterilized. The girls were targeted for sterilization because they were poor, black, and living in public housing.
Let me inform you, let's all get the vaccine. It's about community immunity. I'm talking unity for you and me. If Doc says it's good, then trust me, it's good. Now let's all get the vaccine.
Number of people infected. Flu is now widespread in almost every single state, and nearly 10 million people have become ill so far. 4,800 of those people have died.
And in between school and daycare and other activities, those germs are just churning right now. Dr. Rachel Haley with Lee Summit Medical Center takes a look at this season so far.
We have seen dramatic spikes in flu illnesses on both the Missouri and Kansas side. In fact, our 9 care nows have recorded 1,200 cases of the flu since December 1st. And nationally, we've got approximately 9.7 million people that have caught the flu. 80,000 people have gone in the hospital, and we've had 400 deaths.
Data from the Rhode Island Department of Health shows there were nearly 1,400 influenza hospitalizations in the 2017-18 season, roughly 1,000 the next 2 years, yet so far this season, just 2. There were 60 flu deaths 3 years ago. This season, none.
Scientists say the flu has almost disappeared in the southern hemisphere.
It's another thing that suddenly started to disappear in Korea. The flu.
They're willing to put you in jail in your home, throw us into poverty, shut your small business down, make you go broke, make you beg for money. They are willing to kill you to maintain power, and they don't care. Because there is one cure, and you're the cure. Think about it. We heard all these doctors come out, right, and state that bottom line is, hydroxychloroquine works.
Not for COVID. All this foolishness does not need to happen. There is a cure for COVID. There is a cure for COVID. It's called hydroxychloroquine. It's called zinc. It's called Zithromax. And it is time for the grassroots to wake up and say, no, we're not going to take this any longer.
Yes, we can use security measures. Yes, we can be careful. I'm all for that. We all are. But I think the important thing is we need to not act out of fear. We need to act out of science. We need to do it. We need to get it done. Finally, the barrier, and I hate to say this, but the barrier to getting our kids back in school is not going to be the science. It's going to be the national unions, the teachers union, the National Education Association, other groups who are going to demand money. And listen, I think that it's fine to give people money for PPE and different things in the classroom, but some of their demands are really ridiculous. They're talking about, where I'm from in California, the UTLA, which is the United Teachers of Los Angeles, is demanding that we defund the police. What does that have to do with education?
My name is Sarah Abbott, and I'm Sunrise's Team Support and Culture Director, and just incredibly glad to see how many people are on this call tonight.
My name is Varshini, and I am Sunrise's Executive Director. I am really glad to see almost 600 of you on this call. We are currently witnessing, an uprising against police violence and the murder of Black people in this country.
So I'm going to share a little bit about the difference between some of what we're seeing and hearing in the media and what's really happening on the ground in Minneapolis. So I grew up in rural Minnesota, where I'm calling from today, which, as the Dakota elders shared with us at the beginning of the call, is Dakota land. And I lived in South Minneapolis for many years, and all of those burning buildings that we're seeing on Lake Street, I've driven by or shopped at those stores hundreds of times. And yes, this is like one of my beloved communities. And what I think is so important to understand is that what we are seeing is not just chaos. We're actually seeing resistance and organizing.
This account called Don't Shoot Us, which was posing as a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, used all of these platforms to effectively create an ecosystem where these messages highlighting police brutality, trying to galvanize African American outrage over police brutality, those would be reinforced across a network of platforms. And with some influence, actually, we look and we see, YouTube videos that together were viewed more than 350,000 times, a Facebook page that had more than 250,000 likes. All of these linked to each other, linked through an account that was registered to an address that actually turned out to be a shopping mall in Illinois. That Tumblr page promoted a Pokemon Go competition where if you went to sites where there had been alleged incidents of police brutality and you named your Pokemon after those victims, for instance, naming Pikachu Eric Garner, if you won that competition, this promotion suggested, you might win a free Amazon Prime card.
And what we know is that uprisings, including actions like burning buildings, are legitimate and powerful forms of resistance, and are resisting brutal and violent and dehumanizing systems.
Smoke rising above Washington, D.C. on the 6th night of protest. On the ground, a large fire just a couple hundred meters from the White House, one of many dramatic images on this night.
The province tracks every single case, and so far not one has been linked to those recent protests. So why is that? Well, the credit goes to a combination of things, according to the provincial health officer. They were outside for short periods of time for one, and most kept their distance and wore a mask.
All right, so welcome everybody to the final session of our day 4, or our 4-day crash course to defund the police. Get something to take notes. We want to make sure that this is a lot of great information and that you remember it, so that you can continue your abolition work.
Also, if any of you guys were wondering about the music, so basically all of our slides this week, each day is themed after a Disney Channel movie or Disney Channel show. So today, our title slide is High School Musical. So
defunding the police is not just a demand, it's a strategy, a way to win abolition of policing, prisons, detention centers, and the values and ideas that criminalize Black, Indigenous people of color, people in poverty, and the working class.
In Burnsville, there's a book called Something Happened in Our Town that was read to 4th graders. This book warns students that police are mean to Black people, but nice to white people. Cops stick up for each other, it says, and they don't like Black men. When a character asks why a Black man was shot, the character's sister responds, "It wasn't a mistake. The cops shot him because he was Black." I should add that this book is also listed by the Minnesota Department of Education, so it is likely being read in other classrooms as well.
Loudoun County, Virginia, the epicenter of the fight over critical race theory being taught in America, we've seen countless parents fed up with a program that suggests white kids should be apologetic for being white, and Black kids should feel oppressed even when there is no sign of oppression. In Loudoun County, it's crossed the line. Apparently, the teachers' union is demanding teachers rat out other teachers for their opinions if those opinions don't agree with critical race theory. And get this, I'm not talking about in the classroom. No, these commies want teachers to turn in fellow teachers who say things in their personal lives. Don't believe me? Just watch as Laura Morris, a 5th grade teacher in Loudoun County school system, resigns because she can't take it anymore.
So since my contract outlines the power that you have over my employment in Loudoun County Public Schools, I thought it necessary to resign in front of you. School board, I quit. I quit your policies, I quit your trainings, and I quit being a cog in a machine that tells me to push highly politicized agendas on our most vulnerable constituents, the children. I will find employment elsewhere. I encourage all parents and staff in this county to flood the private schools.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That is just sad. When the teachers union said they were focusing on division this year, I had no idea they meant critical race theory.
All right. Hello, ABEC. My name is Mariah. I am a teacher and son.
And I am Greg, your principal.
We are representing ABEC's Diversity and Equity Committee, and this short video is going to tell you about racial affinity groups.
An affinity group is a designated safe space where everyone in the group shares a particular identity. These groups can be based on gender, sexual orientation, or language, to name a few. At ABEC, we are going to start with racial affinity groups.
Racial affinity groups can provide white people the space to accept their own whiteness without shame or defensiveness, and to build healthy anti-racist identities.
Have to design a curriculum and curricular experiences here for children that allow them to uncover the fundamental issues of our time, of which racism is one. Not to cover these issues, but to uncover them.
Affinity groups mean that, like, when you come together, it means that you aren't just by yourself and you're not different. There's a lot of people that are like you.
I think one of the most important things that white students really need to think about is their own identity and how to articulate who they are, where they came from, what their story is. And that is some of the most important work I think we can do with white students in thinking about how to help them become good allies.
It's one way for you to see people who have your and other people's race or religion. We have lunch together with people who are that race.
Sometimes the work that we're doing in being white allies, I think, can be difficult, and I think that we all have to be honest with ourselves about why that can be difficult. From my perspective, sometimes I don't know the answer or feel like I might not have the right answer. And so I think always digging deeper and knowing yourself well and striving to understand what white identity is and white privilege is can help in the ally work that you do.
I try my best to be a white ally, you know. I don't like say, oh no, you're going, come on. Why do you have to go? I mean, wouldn't you rather have lunch with me? But I know they would much rather go to the affinity groups, and if not, I shouldn't say that to make them take back that decision that's so important to who they are.
And today we're talking about Dr. Kellogg. Now, some of you might have heard of Dr. Kellogg before, or if not, you've heard of the Kellogg Company and the cereal that they've made. And we're not talking about cereal today. We're actually talking about his beliefs and his beliefs in eugenics.
Our collection items about eugenics generally have to do with Dr. Kellogg, which is strange. You know, you think of cornflakes and sometimes exercise programs and healthy living, but you don't always think so much about other things, other kinds of philosophies that he might have been involved with. Kellogg really comes into the picture full force here. The first National Conference on Race Betterment, this was held in 1914 in Battle Creek at Kellogg's Sanitarium. And this is the full program. This contains all of the speeches that were given by Kellogg and lots of other people. There are names you'll recognize, like Melville Dewey and his wife. They both spoke. And the conference topics cover everything from how to eat healthy and how to get enough exercise and why that's so important, right down to something called the eugenics registry, which was something that Kellogg was very interested in developing, and we'll talk more about that soon. One of the pages, these are two different copies of the same book, one part of this includes tables. The eugenicists really tried to come up with data to support their views. Sometimes they had to kind of create the data to support their views. But this is really awful. It's tables that show the rate of efficiency of proposed segregation and sterilization programs. So not only were the eugenicists trying to promote the right sex partners for the best possible children to be created, but also sterilization was a huge part of their program.
Well, Susan Rosenberg is somebody that was convicted in 1985. She possessed 640 pounds of explosives. She had been involved in a number of criminal events in New York City and the tri-state area. She was a member of the Weather Underground and the May 19th Communist Organization. She was sentenced to 58 years in prison. And she was also involved she was a getaway driver in a Brinks armored car robbery in which 2 cops were killed and a security guard was killed. So she went to prison for 58 years and she was commuted, her sentence was commuted after 16 years by President Clinton on his last day in office.
You know, we've got BLM and we've got, the NAACP embracing them, embracing the very people that hate them. It's really incredible if you think about it. So today I'm going to break down for you what you really need to know about Ilhan Omar, exposed to you, because through this New York Times op-ed, a few hints and glimmers were given, but obviously even the New York Times has no idea. There is a terrorist group so covert that it's changed its name, and then Obama buried the changed name. He classified it. Remember how CARE and Ilhan are like, oh my gosh, they have terrorist lists, and the majority are Muslim, and they're not letting us know. Why are they classifying them? We should know who they are. Listen, no, they don't, because then we're watching. This name has been buried for a very long time, since 2008 when it was initiated. In 2010 it was completely buried, and that also came hand in hand with the lawsuit that was happening. If you guys know, CARE was an unindicted terrorist organization.